We have to sit down, talk rather than imbes na magpatutsadahan po. Wala pong nangyayari. Ito po yung naging bunga kung bakit po tayo biglang nawala sa ere. I know that being bombastic, Tarriela earns him likes and makes him probably feel like a rock star, Mr. President. I know national anger sells newspapers. I know mindless patriotism wins accolades. But in reality, as the map show, Mr. President, we are all losing out and are being left behind. The way forward, Mr. President, is open discussion. The starting point is respect for each other's views and the views of our opposing claimants, be it China, Vietnam, Malaysia, etc. The draft resolution, with all due respect, is not the right start, Mr. President.
Mr. President, if I may just point out, the matter of Commodore Tarriela, whether we agree to his statements or not, is one issue. Another issue, Mr. President, is that the Department of National Defense and the Armed Forces of the Philippines have rallied behind Commodore Tarriela and condemned the behavior and the actuations of China's embassy officials. If I may quote, the Department of National Defense and the Armed Forces of the Philippines strongly condemn such an affront to any of its members and reiterates that it shall not be cowed by any official of PROC, whether in their homeland or as guests here. And we shall continue to speak against their lies and malign actions when such are committed. That is our Department of National Defense. That is our Armed Forces of the Philippines, Mr. President. The very least that we should do as a Senate is rally behind our Department of National Defense and our men in uniform who risk their very lives to defend the West Philippine Sea, Mr. President. So the actuations of Commodore Tarriela may not be, may find discomfort with some of our colleagues, and we will respect that. But our defense establishment and our armed forces have spoken. And I believe senators must rally behind and defend and support our defense establishment in view of the aggression and the of China in our sovereign waters and our exclusive economic zone, as well as our continental shelf, Mr. President.
I will go to that point, Mr. President. But we can also draw lessons from the experiences in the Philippine Sea. In 2008, Malaysia and Indonesia had a naval standoff when Indonesia found oil and gas in Ambalat Field and Ambalat East, and Malaysia offered the same areas as Block, ND6 and ND7. To de-escalate, they agreed to a moratorium in 2009. Last year, their national petroleum corporations agreed on a joint exploration and development. We ourselves are experienced in cooperation in the Philippine Sea. Let me show another map. This is the last map, Mr. President.
Mr. President, just a fine point. Yes, we too have disputes with Vietnam, with Malaysia, and even Indonesia, Mr. President. But the difference is that they do not water cannon us, and they do not ram their ships, their Coast Guards, their Coast Guard, the Chinese Coast Guard, to our Philippine ships, Mr. President. It's an entirely different story in that regard, Mr. President.
Let me show you this map, Mr. President. This map is from the US-funded think tank Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative, or AMTI. On the map are areas marked with X. On the upper right hand of the South China Sea, the mark refers to the exclusive economic zone and continental shelf overlap between the Philippines and Taiwan. We have a fisheries and law enforcement agreement there. On the lower left hand, Mr. President, the mark represents the dispute over extended continental shelf between Philippines, Malaysia, and Vietnam. We are in discussion with Vietnam now. On the bottom corner are disputes over Sabah and the territorial sea and contiguous zones it generates. In Sulu Sea and Celebes Sea, we have a tri-point with Malaysia and Indonesia, and the same in the Philippines with Indonesia, Palau, Japan, and Taiwan, emanating from Pratas Island. However, this map will demonstrate to us, Mr. President, the complex territorial and maritime disputes facing the Philippines. Malaysia is in the Sulu Sea and Celebes Sea, with Indonesia over continental shelf in the Celebes Sea, with Palau and Japan, Ryukyu Islands in the Philippine Sea, with Taiwan in the Basi Channel, with China, Malaysia, and Vietnam in the South China Sea, and with China, Taiwan in the South China Sea over the maritime zones generated by Pratas Islands. We must be doing something right in the management of this dispute, Mr. President.
Yes, we are. And
Yun nga po, kaya
and-
po
and
pinipilit kong ipaliwanag na bakit dito sa mga areang ito ay nagagawa po nating i-manage ang hindi natin pagkakaunawaan. Ang sabi po nyo kanina, because they are not water cannoning us.
They are also not aggressive. They are not coercive, and therefore there will be no escalation. The aggression of China is primarily the reason why tensions in the disputed areas have risen over time. We have in fact filed 245 protests against China's incursion and illegal activities in our exclusive economic zone since 2022, Mr. President. We also exercise diplomacy. We recognize, and that's precisely why we brought the matter to the tribunal. We recognize that China is a power, economic power, and an emerging military power. And what do small nations like us have? We have the rule of law, international law, and that's why we brought this matter to the International Arbitral Tribunal, Mr. President. We are not the problem here, Mr. President. It is China, the aggression of China, that is the problem here.
Mr. President, si Commodore Tarriela po ba ginawan ng caricatures or effigy yung mga heads of state ng Vietnam, ng Malaysia, at iba pang karatig bansa?
Hindi kailangan, Mr. President, dahil wala naman silang pag-water cannon sa atin. Hindi naman po nila sinasagasaan ng ating mga mangingisda o inaaresto. Hindi na naman nila, yun na nga, binabangga, wino-water cannon. Yung may aksidente pa na kung saan yung Chinese vessel ay iniwanan ang 22 mga mangingisda natin. At sino ang sumalba sa kanila? Vietnam ang sumalba sa kanila. So bakit tayo makikipagpalitan ng maanghang na salita sa mga meron tayong sabihin na nating maritime disputes na hindi naman tayo inaapi at binabalahura at binabastos, Mr. President. Mr. President, hindi lang po si Commodore Tarriela, for the record, pati ang ating Senate President, matapos nung binanggit yung persona ng grata, nagsalita ng baluktot, Mr. President. So sana maintindihan natin, hindi lang ito usupin ni Commodore Tarriela, hindi lang ito usupin ng mga senador o kaya mga kongresistang binabastos nila. Usapin ito ng Pilipinas na ipaglalaban natin ang atin at dapat magkaisa tayo, Mr. President.
What if China tells the Philippine Embassy in Beijing not to post or publish views that contradict the international law opinions of Chinese officials? Would that be acceptable to the Philippines?
I'm sorry, Mr. President. I beg your indulgence. You are saying that if Vietnam publishes, sorry, I missed the
No,
the
what
last.
if China tells the Philippine Embassy in Beijing not to post or publish views that contradict the international law opinions of Chinese officials? Would that be acceptable to the Philippines? Halimbawa lang, sinabihan yung ating embahada doon. Huwag kayong magpapublish
Yes,
ng mga
well,
views.
Well, Mr. President, that's their country. They will do what they will do. They will, in fact, there is no freedom of the press in China, Mr. President. So, if the government does that, then we will have to respect their position because we are merely guests in China, just as they are merely guests in the Philippines, Mr. President.
I would disagree, Mr. President. That will be unacceptable to me. Another question. The Philippine Embassy in Beijing assists the Philippine Coast Guard and DND in monitoring Chinese vessels in the West Philippine Sea. Have you heard China complain that this essential work of the Philippine Embassy interferes with Chinese internal affairs?
Mr. President, whether they complain or not, they're already in our exclusive economic zone. I'm sorry, but I'm trying to understand the position of the good gentleman in his defense of China and their position.
I am not defending China, Mr. President. I said, sinabi ko na kanina, ang ating discussion ngayon is not in defense of any other countries. We are defending Philippine interest. Ang pangyayari lang, kailangan nating linawin, ano ba talagang pinagtatanggol natin? Kung hindi po tayo nakatitiyak kung anong area ang pinagtatanggol natin, hindi po malinaw. Pati paggasta natin ng budget, kung alin ang dedepensahan natin. Yun lang ang punto rito eh. At pinaliliwanag ko kanina pa sa magitan ng mga mapa, hindi po nagkakaroon ng positibong resulta sa ating bansa, yung pagbabangayan. Nakita na po natin the South China Sea is rich in mineral deposits, in oil and gas. Nauhuli na po tayo dahil patutsadahan ng patutsadahan. Bakit nagawa po ng ibang bansa? Bakit hindi po natin magawa? Dahil nga po sa walang katapusang patutsada.